If you were born between 1964 and 1966, you are turning 60, 61, or 62 this year. And if you have been anywhere near financial news lately, you already know the headline, Social Security is running out of money. I completely understand why you would want to file tomorrow. When I read those headlines about retirement funds evaporating, my first instinct is the same one you probably have right now. Get the money out before the government spends it. That instinct makes total sense. It is a rational response to a genuinely scary situation. But here is what that instinct is actually doing to your retirement. When you claim Social Security at 62 instead of waiting until your full retirement age at 67, the SSA permanently reduces your monthly benefit by 30%. Not temporarily. Not until the fund stabilizes. Permanently. So let's be precise about what that means. Say your full benefit would be $2,200 a month at 67. Claim at 62, and that number drops to $1,540 every single month for the rest of your life. And if Social Security does face a cut down the road, that cut applies to your already reduced $1,540, not to the $2,200 you walked away from. The action you are taking to protect yourself from the system is the very thing that guarantees the outcome you are most afraid of. Running out of dignity in your 80s, while inflation quietly eats through a check that was already slashed. Before you make a decision you cannot undo, we need to separate what Social Security's funding problem actually is from what the news is telling you it is. Because those two things are not the same. Let me introduce you to Thomas. He is 60 years old. Last month, his company handed him a severance package and walked him out the door. Part of a workforce reduction, they said. AI automation, they said. He had 14 years with that company. Now he is sitting at his kitchen table, reading that Social Security is going bankrupt, and doing the math in his head. If AI is replacing workers everywhere, who is left to pay into the system? If nobody is paying in, the fund hits zero. And if the fund hits zero, his retirement disappears. Thomas's logic feels airtight. It is also wrong on two separate levels. Start with the word bankrupt. That word means something specific. It means an entity cannot pay its obligations and collapses to zero. That is not what the Social Security trustees are projecting. What they are actually projecting is that the OASD trust fund surplus, the reserve built up over decades of collecting more than it paid out, will be depleted around 2035. That is a meaningful distinction, because Social Security does not run on savings. It runs on current payroll taxes. Every working American pays into FICA right now. 6.2% from the employee, 6.2% from the employer, 12.4% total. That money flows in continuously. It does not sit in a vault waiting to be raided. The SSA trustees report projects that even if Congress does absolutely nothing by 2035, incoming FICA revenue would still cover approximately 80% to 83% of scheduled benefits, not zero. Not even close to zero. That is the actual worst case. Now, about Thomas's AI theory. The concern sounds reasonable. If machines replace workers, fewer people pay FICA and the fund shrinks faster. But this assumes that productivity gains from AI do not translate into wages elsewhere in the economy. Historically, that assumption has not held. When manufacturing automated in the 1980s, service employment expanded. When software replaced entire categories of clerical work, new categories of jobs appeared. The labor market has never been a fixed container with a lid on it. New work, new wages, new FICA contributions tend to follow. That does not mean AI presents zero risk to the system. It means Thomas's version of the collapse, the one where Social Security hits zero because nobody is working anymore, is not what the data supports. Worrying about AI and inflation does not make you financially naive. It makes you someone who is paying attention and trying to protect your family. That is exactly what you should be doing. The problem is not the concern itself. The problem is acting on a worst-case scenario that is more extreme than what the actual projections show. So let's be precise about what the real risk is. If you claim at 62 today and Congress still fails to act by 2035, you are facing a 20% cut applied to a benefit that is already 30% reduced. You have stacked two permanent losses on top of each other. But if you wait, if you hold to full retirement age, that same 20% congressional cut applies to a much larger base. The math does not work the same way in both directions. And that brings us to something more uncomfortable than the numbers. Because most people already sense that claiming early is not the smart financial move. They know it. So why does the fear feel so much louder than the math? Here is what nobody in personal finance wants to say out loud. The math is not actually the problem. You can run the numbers. You can read the SSA trustees report. You can understand intellectually that 80% of a delayed benefit is better than 70% of an early one. And still, the feeling does not go away. Because the feeling is not about the math. I remember when I first started doing retirement planning work, I thought my job was to find the optimal break-even point. Run the numbers, show the client the crossover age, done. I thought that was what people needed. I was wrong about that. Completely wrong. What I kept seeing, sitting across from people in their late 50s and early 60s, was that no calculation ever made anyone feel safe. They needed something the spreadsheet could not give them. The certainty that their independence was not going to be taken away. That is what this is actually about. Not the 20% cut, not the trust fund depletion date. The real fear, the one underneath all of it, is much older and much quieter than any headline. It is the image of standing at a checkout line at 83 years old, counting what is in your wallet before you get to the register. It is the thought of your kids having a conversation behind your back about what to do with you. It is the slow erosion of being the person in your family who handles things, who provides, who does not need to ask anyone for help. That is what people are actually protecting when they say they want to claim Social Security early. They are not trying to outsmart the system. They are trying to hold on to their dignity. And the anger at the government, the sense that Washington is stealing what you earned, that is real too. But it is mostly a container for something that feels too vulnerable to say directly. It is easier to be furious at a politician than to sit with the fear that you might not be okay. I have been close to that feeling myself. The uncertainty about whether the floor will hold. It is not a comfortable place to think from. When you make a financial decision from that place, from the urgency of protect it now before it disappears, you are not making a strategic choice. You are reacting. And a permanent 30-year financial decision made in reaction to a headline is exactly the kind of decision you cannot walk back. The anger wants you to punish the system by pulling out early. But the only person that punishes is you at 82, living on a benefit that was reduced twice. Once by your own hand, once by Congress. You did not fail at planning. You were handed a system that is genuinely confusing, genuinely unstable in some ways, and surrounded by people whose business model depends on keeping you anxious. That is not a character flaw. That is just the environment. If any of this feels familiar, consider subscribing. This channel exists to help you move from reactive to deliberate, one decision at a time. Now, Let's set the fear aside entirely and look at Social Security for what it actually is, legally and structurally. Because once you see it that way, the whole calculation changes. Most people think of Social Security as a savings account with their name on it. Money goes in during your working years, and someday you pull it back out. Under that mental model, the instinct to withdraw early makes complete sense. If the bank is about to fail, you get your money out first. But that is not what Social Security is. Legally, structurally, it is a longevity insurance contract. And that distinction changes everything about how you should be making decisions right now. Think about how you treat your homeowner's insurance. You do not call your insurer and say, "I have been paying premiums for 20 years and my house has not burned down yet, so I want my money back." That would be absurd. The insurance is not valuable because you collect on it. It is valuable because if the worst happens, you are not destroyed by it. Social Security works the same way. The benefit of waiting is not that you get more money in the short term. It is that you cannot outlive it. At 87, at 91, at 95, the check still comes. That is what you are actually buying when you delay. Congress cannot drain that contract to zero. Legally, benefits are an obligation, not a discretionary line item. The structure of the program has survived every political cycle since 1935. Adjustments have happened. Cuts to zero have not. Now let's put two specific paths next to each other, because the numbers here matter. Path 1, you claim at 62 in 2026. The SSA permanently reduces your benefit by 30%. If your full retirement age benefit would have been $2,200 a month, you are now collecting $1,540. That reduction is locked in for life. Path 2, you wait until 67, your full retirement age. Your benefit stays at $2,200. Now assume the worst congressional scenario actually happens. It is 2035, no fix has passed, and benefits are cut 20% across the board. Your check drops to $1,760. Compare those two numbers. $1,760 versus $1,540. Even in the scenario you are most afraid of, waiting still pays more than panicking. The person who claimed early to protect themselves ended up with the lower number anyway, every month, for the rest of their life. And if you are married, the stakes are higher than your own check. When one spouse dies, the survivor steps into the higher of the two benefits. If you claimed early and locked in a reduced amount, your spouse could be living on that reduced number for a decade or more after you are gone. Delaying is not just protecting yourself. It is protecting the person who might be alone and 80, and depending entirely on that monthly deposit. Waiting to claim is not giving the government a free loan. It is buying the most cost-effective longevity insurance available to you. You are paying a premium in patience, and what you get in return is a floor that holds regardless of how long you live. But I also know that telling someone to simply wait is not a complete answer. If a 20% cut does arrive in 2035, patience alone does not close that gap. You need a way to make that potential reduction mathematically irrelevant before it happens. That is exactly what we build next. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. You cannot control whether Congress passes a fix before 2035. You cannot control whether Social Security takes a 20% hit. You cannot control inflation or interest rates or what the market does next quarter. Those variables are outside your reach entirely. But there is one variable you can control right now, today, in 2026, your tax bracket. Most people in their early 60s are in what I call the gap years. You are either recently retired or winding down your working income, but required minimum distributions have not kicked in yet. RMDs do not start until age 73. That window between now and then is one of the most valuable and most underused planning opportunities in the entire tax code. Last month, I was sitting with a couple, both 61, going through their financial picture together. When we finished the Roth conversion paperwork for 2026, I saw the shift in their faces. Not excitement exactly, more like relief. Not because they suddenly had more money, but because they knew, with certainty, that the IRS would never touch that account again. That is a specific kind of peace that no market return can replicate. Here is the mechanism behind that feeling. When you convert money from a traditional 401k or IRA into a Roth IRA, you pay income tax on that conversion now, at today's rates under today's brackets. The money then grows tax-free. Withdrawals in retirement are tax-free. And critically, Roth accounts are not counted as income when the IRS calculates how much of your Social Security benefit is taxable. That last part is where the leverage lies. Right now, depending on your combined income, up to 85% of your Social Security benefit can be subject to federal income tax. That is not a penalty. It is just how the formula works. But if your taxable income in retirement is low enough because your savings are sitting in a Roth, that formula works in your favor instead of against you. The strategy is straightforward. In 2026, identify how much room you have before you hit the top of the 22% or 24% federal tax bracket. Convert that amount from your traditional accounts into a Roth. Do it again next year and the year after. You are not trying to convert everything at once. You are filling the bracket steadily while your income is still manageable and before RMDs force the decision for you. Here is why the timing matters. If you do nothing between now and 73, your RMDs will arrive automatically, calculated by the IRS based on your account balance. Those distributions count as ordinary income. They can push your Social Security into a higher taxation tier, bump you into a higher Medicare premium bracket, and create what planners call the tax torpedo, a sudden spike in your effective tax rate during the exact years you were expecting stability. The Roth conversion strategy diffuses that torpedo before it is ever armed. So run the scenario side by side. If Social Security cuts 20% in 2035 and you have done nothing, you absorb that cut in full on top of whatever tax drag your traditional accounts are already creating. If you have been converting steadily since 2026, that 20% cut lands on a benefit that is already being supplemented by tax-free Roth withdrawals that do not affect your tax bracket at all. The 20% cut becomes a smaller problem when your other income is invisible to the IRS. You pay a little tax now while you choose the amount and the timing, or you pay more tax later when the government sets the terms. That is the trade-off. And for most people in their early 60s with meaningful traditional account balances, the math is not close. Here is where we land. Social Security is not collapsing to zero. The worst realistic projection, with no congressional action at all, is a benefit reduction of around 20% sometime in the mid-2030s. That is a real problem worth taking seriously. It is not the apocalypse the headlines are selling. Claiming at 62 to outrun that problem locks in a 30% permanent reduction today, guaranteed, to protect yourself from a 20% possible reduction a decade from now. That is not protection. That is the thing you were afraid of, self-inflicted. And the Roth conversion window you have right now in your early 60s, before RMDs, before Social Security begins, before your tax situation gets more complicated, that window does not stay open forever. Every year you wait is a year of potential tax-free growth you cannot get back. You cannot change how Congress manages the trust fund. You cannot vote away the depletion timeline. What you can do is make the decisions inside your own balance sheet precise enough that whatever Congress does becomes a smaller event in your financial life. That is the whole point of this. Not to predict the system, not to beat it, just to make sure its failures cannot reach you. You can keep watching the headlines and staying angry. That is an available choice. Or you can take that same energy and put it into the one part of this you actually control: your tax bracket, your conversion strategy, your retirement floor. The dignity you are trying to protect does not come from winning an argument with Washington. It comes from building something Washington cannot touch. If you want to keep building that, subscribe to Wes Investor. I will see you in the next video.